You're listening to the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast, your source for news, discussion, and debates about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley. We want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the show. If you're new here, thank you so much for giving us a shot. You can find us everywhere podcasts are found. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Stitcher, you name it, we're there. Go subscribe today if you haven't already. If you use Apple products and iOS, anything like that, go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts as well. Leave us a 5-star review, and also leave us a written one, and we'll read it here on air as well. You can find us on social media at Vol Hoops Fever on Twitter, and we're at Vol Basketball Fever on Facebook as well. Gene, I want to make a promise to our listeners here right at the top of the show, and that our show will not be as ugly, as awful as Tennessee's game against Texas Tech. I think I could feel pretty safe making that promise because I felt like I was watching a early Conzo Martin era basketball game, Gene, because it was one of those games where you don't know if you can really give a ton of credit to the defense, and you got to give some, because there were times where I thought Fulkerson and Campbell made some really good plays in the post. Fulkerson finished the game with 5 blocks. He actually ended up with a double-double, 10 points, 10 boards, and 5 blocks in that game. And there are other times where Texas Tech, I thought, made some really good plays, and man, they were blocking a bunch of shots. Tennessee finished with 8, and Tech finished with 6. They had 6 steals as well, and Tennessee had 6 steals. So there were good defensive plays that were made in that game. But man, the offense was horrible. Doesn't even do it justice. It was awful, and it to me, we'll discuss it in a second. But I'm almost willing to just kind of dump it and move on. And that's what if I were a coach, or Rick Barnes, or if I were Mark Adams for Tech, or anybody like that, that would be kind of the mindset I'd have. Is yes, there are things to learn from it, and things that I think that we can discuss it and talk about more than just it being a horrible offensive game. But I'm almost the mindset of you dump it and move on, because it wasn't like it was just Tennessee that shot horribly. Tennessee went 6 of 40 from 3-point line, 15%. They were 19 of 71 overall, 27% basically from the floor overall, 50% from the free throw line, 8 of 16. But Tech, conversely, shot 31% from the floor overall. They were 4 of 24 from 3, which is 16.7%. And they were only 15 of 25 from the free throw line, which is 60%. So they didn't shoot well. And then you pull on top of that, Gene, the next game in the Jimmy V Classic between Villanova and Syracuse, those two teams combined to shoot 33.8%, right? And Tennessee and Tech combined to shoot 28.8%. No team had a good free throw shooting. I think one of those teams in the Nova-Syracuse game was like 4 of 6 from the free throw line, which that's such a small sample size, but the other team shot like 60% or worse, just like in the Tennessee and Texas Tech game. So, Gene, it wasn't like it was just Tennessee having an awful night. There was a stretch there from about the 11:50 mark in the second half until I think about the 5-ish minute mark, where neither team had made a field goal. The only points that had been scored were on a couple free throws, and it was brutal. No shots were falling. Nothing any team was putting in there was putting up was going in the bucket. And then finally Tennessee made a bucket to tie it up at 41 apiece late in the second half. Then of course it had to go to overtime because we all couldn't get enough the 40 minutes of that slop fest. And then in overtime, Texas Tech was able to get a couple shots to fall, and Tennessee still couldn't really get anything going, and that's what ended up being the difference. But, Gene, there are a lot of takeaways I have from this game. But the moment that the Josiah Jordan-James had that breakaway, and he went up to go for a dunk or layup or whatever he was going to do, and his knee twisted or buckled or something, and it just gave out on him and made him fly up awkwardly in the air, and he missed a wide-open dunk/layup, that's when I knew that there was some sort of curse to that building. Like Madison Square Garden that night, like there was something wrong with that building, with those rims, with the floor there. I don't know, but we could sit here and rant and rave and whatever, but I'm not one, my personality isn't one to get too worked up over a game in early December in a basketball season. but especially one like this where you have just it's a historically like once in a decade type of performance. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just Tennessee. Texas Tech also had a horrible offensive night, and then Villanova and Syracuse also had really bad offensive nights. So, Gene, before we get into some specifics of things I think are worth talking about takeaways from this game and moving forward, you can just give your thoughts on it too, because man, the last time I've seen a game that bad for Tennessee offensively for both teams, because Tennessee's had some stinkers before, but the other team ends up blowing Tennessee out. The last time I can think of where both teams are just dreadful like that was that Tennessee-Georgetown game under Conza Martin about a decade ago. That's the last time I can remember a game that I walked away from feeling like this. And again, that one was also early in the season. So, this was just, it was all sorts of just disgusting to watch in this game. So, like I said, before we get to some specifics and stuff, feel free to give your thoughts on and say whatever you want to say about anything right now.
Yeah. Obviously, I was telling Nathanael before the podcast started that I had an opportunity to see the last, 4 minutes of regulation and the overtime. My son had a basketball game at Cleveland last night, so I tuned in. I saw it was close. I went to my YouTube TV on my phone and started watching, and immediately saw, I think, somebody brick a three. And I knew nothing about the stats other than listening to a little bit of what is it Max Schulman and is that his name, and Jay Billis. Mm-hmm. Listen to them talk about just how horrible the shooting had been, and I'll be honest, and I was telling Nathaniel this as well. I got a close game alert on my phone, and it said 37-35 or whatever the score was. I thought it was 12 minutes to go in regulation or something like that, or halftime score. I didn't realize it's 3 minutes to go in the game. I'm like, oh wow. So, man, I look and you see certain things, and it's one of those. It's a hard thing to kind of figure out. It's like a lot of coaches talk about with when they when they talk about scrimmages that they have, blue gold games and stuff like that, or orange or white games, depending on what school you go to, UTC or Tennessee or whatever. When you have inter-squad scrimmages, and you ask a coach to maybe talk about the performance, it's well, we were really good offensively, but that means we were also really bad defensively. How do we kind of look at this? How do we figure this? And so I think when you look at the Tennessee performance, you're trying to figure out how good were they, how bad were they offensively as opposed to how good were they defensively. How do we quantify what we watched there? Should we be excited about the defense and say we can figure some offensive out, or do we blame the arena, the surroundings, Madison Square Garden? How do we handle that? And I think the best way is to just kind of say, if you've been listening to this podcast, we've talked about this on a number of times. I think just from a statistical standpoint, one difference I saw was that Tennessee took 10 more shots, took 16 more threes, but shot a slightly, it's not really a high bar, but shot a slightly worse percentage from three than Texas Tech. And if you're going to shoot 43s in a game out of 71 shots, well over half of your shots are threes, mm-hmm. and you're only making 6 of them, how are you going to get that offense? That's going to be a question that is going to be asked of this team for the rest of the season. It's fine when the threes are falling. It's fine when Kennedy Chandler is unstoppable getting into the lane and getting to the paint and doing things, but good teams are going to take things like that away. And I think the biggest concern, the defense I thought looked really good in the time. You remembered little things, you remember reasons why Josiah Jordan-James, although his statistical production is never going to be what a lot of people want, why he's so important to that team. First of all, that three that he hit without any sort of except for the slight hitch in his shot, which is just a part of who he is, there was no hesitation in taking that shot. And it was a huge shot that he hit. But you're reminded, because he holds a lot of stuff that they want to do, especially on the defensive side, together, because he can guard so many different positions. He can guard guards. He can guard bigs. Like, you're reminded of that stuff. And so you have a guy like that can kind of, keep everything under wraps defensively. Can you figure some stuff out offensively? Because you know right now that you have a good defensive team. You're trying to figure out exactly what you are offensively, which is kind of hard, because when the threes are falling, you're scoring 70 or so points a game. When the threes aren't falling, you're 52. And the more and more you look at their schedule, the more and more you realize that, I think we talked about this last week, UNC Greensboro, USC Upstate are the next two games on the schedule. And then you've got the pending mess that is Memphis right now, which, your fear if you're Tennessee is that's going to be the game that they figure things out. Because right now, I mean, for any complaint Tennessee fans you may want to have about your team, I guarantee you it's a lot worse at that FedEx Forum. People who go to that FedEx Forum and watch games, I guarantee it's considerably.
Well, I think won't it be in Nashville though? This one, I think.
No, the game's in Nashville. I'm just saying the people who who attend FedEx Forum to watch games. I'm sorry about the misconfusion there, but Memphis fans. Let's just instead of trying to make things difficult, Memphis fans they're much more frustrated because they had higher expectations, because the preseason prognosticators looked at Imani Bates and Jalen Duran and said it's the top 5 team in the country, which is flawed, and I'll always say that, but it's what it is. So, like, once you get past these next 2 games and then you get Memphis on the schedule, we'll see what Memphis is, but you've only got 2 more chances where you can kind of figure out what your offense is going to be. And after that, your offense is what it is. And that's, as far as this team is concerned, you're encouraged by what you saw defensively, but you're frustrated because you have no clue what you are offensively. And that, to me, is going to remain a concern the rest of the way.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on some of the things you said there about the offense and specifically in this Texas Tech game, it was very obvious to me and to anyone watching, and I think the commentators said it a couple of times, Billis and Schulman, as you said, on ESPN. Tech's length was really bothering Tennessee, and I think Tech obviously watched the film of Tennessee's win over Colorado over the weekend, which we'll touch on a little bit, but obviously the Tech game was the most recent one, so we'll talk more about it. But Tennessee had a very good win over Colorado, where they put up 69 points, and Kenny Chandler had in an incredible game where he went off for 27 points, and I think had the most field goals made by a Vol in a very long time. He tied Admiral, then I think he hit that bucket at the end of the game to pass him, but he went off, and you had Vescovy had a pretty good game and then got 2 fouls like he has been doing lately in the first half. That he still ended up with 13 points in that game, but you could tell they watched the film from that game and other games too for Tennessee this year and said, we're not going to let Tennessee's guards beat us on attacking the basket off the dribble and driving to the basket and being able to either go up for a layup or a floater or dish it back out for an easy 3. And they were very good at defending the paint. And their length, just their long arms, their long bodies, that Tech has a lot of guys that are 6'6" or taller, and they use that to their advantage, and they were able to recover so quickly. They said in the game, Gene, I think it was Jay Billis who said it, that game was a clinic for how to recover quickly on defense for both teams, but really specifically for Tech too, because they did such a good job where there was times where it looked like, okay, Tennessee is going to be able to get a shot off here and it be fairly uncontested, and then suddenly a Tech player was there and had a hand in his face. And Tennessee on the other end did a pretty good job of that too, but there were plenty of times where Tech had a wide open shot and just missed it. And there were times where Tennessee or Vescovy or Bailey or Ziegler had their feet set and got off a good shot, like a good one, not a hand in the face, not a fadeaway, not a bad shot, got off really good shots. and they weren't falling. So my point is you're right there. I agree with you 100% that when Tennessee's had the 3 taken away from them this year, or excuse me, when they've had, the ability to drive to the basket and whatnot taken away from them, when you've had more of a focus on the post and taking that away and leading to the extra pass that can lead to a better 3-point shot, Tennessee struggled this year. And really they've struggled a lot away from Thompson-Boling shooting the 3. They've only had one game this season away from home that's been good from the 3-point line. We talked about last podcast, Gene, the splits for Colorado when they played at home and they played away. And Tennessee did a really good job of kind of reversing that course and making Colorado have some really bad offensive sets and really bad offensive possessions in that game, and held Colorado to 54 points. And they were only Colorado was only 19 of 55 overall and 4 of 17 from 3. But Tennessee at home this season, I'm trying to add it up here really quick because the thing I'm looking at doesn't have like split stats. But Tennessee this season at home against UT Martin shot 42.5% from 3. Against ETSU, 43.5. Against Tennessee Tech, 26.1. Against Presbyterian, 51.9. Those are all, except for the Tech game, those are all good. So Tennessee, I would say, has a 40 plus, almost probably a 45% plus almost percentage of 3-point shots at home. Neutral site against Villanova, 17.9%. Against UNC, 45%. That's very good. Against Colorado on the road, 25%. Against Texas Tech on a neutral site, 15%. So that right there, we want to talk about the splits of Colorado. It's basically the same thing for Tennessee. Their splits on 3-point shooting away from Thompson-Boling are not good. Like they're very bad right now, and that does not. Again, we're in December. We're like not even a quarter of the way through the season at this point. Not really necessarily. It might technically be a quarter of the way through now, but still, regardless, like I don't want to hit the panic button or paint everything with a broad stroke 8 games into the year, especially with the young players Tennessee has right now that are having to play key minutes. And, they're not a young team, but they're not an old team at the same time. But that's a stat that really concerns you if you're looking ahead to March, when you're not going to be playing at home anymore. When you're playing in the postseason, in the SEC tournament, in the NCAA tournament, you're not playing in Thompson-Boling. You're even playing in venues you haven't played in all season. You're going to be playing I guess technically when you play in the SEC tournament, I think it's in Bridgestone again. So you'll have played one game there because you've played Memphis there, and a lot of those guys have played in the SEC tournament, before. But you get to the NCAA tournament, because this team is still going to be an NCAA tournament team. I don't, I'm not taking away too much from this one game, but you get to postseason play, Gene. That's where those stats really concern me. Tennessee has been very good at Thompson-Boling from the 3-point line, but they've been very bad away from Thompson-Boling behind the 3-point line, and that that has to be corrected quick, fast, in a hurry. And you would rather have these types of games and have these types of lessons happen right now in November against Villanova and in December against Texas Tech than to get into conference play and go, we don't know, like we didn't get tested in conference play and in non-conference play, and suddenly we've had these things we didn't realize and haven't had a chance to even address, let alone try to fix. So Tennessee, just because it's happened doesn't mean they can't fix it or that it can't be fixed, but they have a lot of things to fix. And I think that also looks at, it starts with what do you do rotation-wise, because Tennessee against Tech played a lot of 1-4, where they had one post and 4 guards. You had either usually Fulkerson, but sometimes Camwa as the forward, and then you had Kennedy, you had Zakai Ziegler, you had Vescovy, and then you had Bailey most of the time out there as the other 4 guys. Sometimes it was Powell, but Powell didn't play a whole lot in the second half, and then you didn't have Huntley-Hatfield or Urosh play really any of the second half, which I was fine with Urosh not playing in the second half. But Gene, to me, I think it shows that Huntley-Hatfield is not ready at this moment in time to be that pound inside guy that you need him to be, because Tennessee doesn't have that, and he's the biggest body and a guy who could be that, and they didn't play him because clearly Rick Barnes doesn't think he's ready. And I thought from the 4 or 5 minutes he played in the first half that he didn't look ready to be either to be in the role and to be playing primetime minutes in the post. But at the same time, Powell, like I would like to see Powell's minutes increase and Victor Bailey's decrease, but at the same time, it's not like Powell shot any better than Victor Bailey in the game against Texas Tech. At least in that game, Bailey finished 1 of 6 overall, and all those shots were from 3, so 1 of 6 from 3. in his 20 minutes, and then Justin Powell was 0 for in the game, 0 for 3, and he didn't shoot anything inside the 3-point line either. So neither of those guys did anything, but at least Bailey went out and grabbed 6 rebounds. We talked last podcast about he doesn't do anything other than score. He's going to have to do more than just that if he wants to get on the floor. He had 6 rebounds and a block, and he was playing some pretty pesky defense. His defense intensity in that game was the best I'd seen probably from his whole Tennessee career. So that to me spoke to why he was on the floor and why Powell was not. But I think those are some questions you got to ask. Are, this game we talked about last podcast was the game where I think you were going to see what the lineup could look like moving forward. And I think you're going to see that 1-4 lineup more. I don't think you're going to see more of the traditional 3-guard lineup and 2-forward lineup. I think you're going to see a lot more for Tennessee. I think you'll see the starting lineup be that 3-2. But I think when it comes crunch time in the second half, I think unless you have depending on the roster of the other team, I think you're going to see a lot more of that 4-1. And I think that's bad news for a guy like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, because typically your one, unless he's in foul trouble for Tennessee, is going to be John Fulkerson, because he's your veteran, he's the leader of the team, he's the guy who has been there for a long time. You're going to trust him to play over a true freshman. I like the 4-1 lineup. It didn't work for Tennessee a whole lot on Tuesday night, but nothing was working for Tennessee Tuesday night. So I mean, it's really hard to take away a whole lot from that game. Honestly, it just really is. But I think we're going to see more 4-1, and I think I would like to see more Justin Powell. But if Victor Bailey keeps up the defensive intensity that he had in this game moving forward, I can be convinced to keep Victor Bailey playing 20 minutes or so, and Powell being a guy who is maybe not playing as much. But we're at the point now where guys' minutes who've been playing a lot lately, because you're playing a bunch of garbage teams for the most part, they're going to be decreased because there's just only so many minutes you can throw around and play guys. So,
right. Go ahead. Yeah, no, you're fine. And I think it goes back. I remember when you and I were talking in the preseason, and I think we had the question. Yeah, like Tennessee's got tall bodies. Mm-hmm. But do they have bigs? And they don't have experience. And I think that was always going to be the question around this team, which goes back to, I think last week it was that you said, we were talking about, I think it was the Tennessee Tech game. And I think you made mention of, well, there's, they let, Tennessee Tech allowed Tennessee to shoot. And I think a lot of teams are going to just let Tennessee shoot their way either in or out of games, mm-hmm. because they've shown very little capability to have any sort of inside presence, sort of inside threat. Because you get past Fulkerson, who is a nice player and will go down as one of the most beloved Vols in history. But he's mainly like finesse. He's not going to go in there and pound for baskets and things of that nature. I know what he did towards the end of the 2019-20 season. He was amazing in those last like 6-7 games. I think he averaged like 18 points and 10 rebounds a game. But Tennessee had also just basically, the coaching staff, in my opinion, looked at what they had and said, our best bet this season is to just throw the ball to John. Because, I mean, if people remember that team, it was a mess. That was the year Lamonte had retired, and Bowden was trying to figure things out but couldn't hit a shot until, for like 2 months. And they realized their best course of action offensively was to, try to find ways to get Fulkerson some baskets. This year's team right now at this point is not that. And so a lot of teams, again, because not many teams, even with John Fulkerson, in my opinion, being a really, really good basketball player, teams are going to say, all right, let him go get 20 and 10. Okay, cool. If you think he can go get 20 and 10, let him go get 20 and 10. And until Tennessee shows an opponent that they're willing to let him get those sorts of numbers, then a lot of teams are going to play Tennessee that way. And not many teams are built kind of like like Texas Tech in terms of the length and stuff like that. But a lot of teams they face the rest of the way are built that way. You've got Alabama on the schedule. You've got Kentucky on the schedule. You've got LSU, who's always – those are teams that have size. And so, like, I think earlier in the season when you're seeing all the threes, that's kind of what – teams are looking at that game film. They're like, oh, they're just going to sell out for the three. And, again, it looks good when they're shooting 40 of them and 40% are going in. Because that right there, is 48 points. It's essentially 50 points just off threes. And then when you're hitting all those threes, now you open up some of the interior stuff. But again, a lot of teams are just going to say, all right, you think you can average, you think you can get 45 points from 3-point range? Try us. Last night that Tennessee couldn't. There's certain games to which they can, but like there has to be a certain formula for their success that they're going to have that Tennessee's going to have. And I think they're going to be similarly built to that 20, I think it's the 2017-18 team, the team where I think Grant was a sophomore and Admiral's a junior, where they leaned a lot on their defense and then got timely baskets, but that team had an inside presence in Grant Williams. This team hasn't fully shown that they have that yet. And they haven't fully shown that they're committed to using that aspect of the offense. Brendan Huntley-Hatfield looks lost out there because he's never played post before. Uros Plastic has not, obviously he's a big, but he's more of a finesse big. Mm-hmm. And he's an offensive guy. He's not going to give you a ton of defense, although from some things I've seen, he's gotten better in that regard. I do think that Uros has improved in his time in Knoxville. But, so your only option after those guys is that. I noticed Olivier played, 15 minutes last night? You would know far better than I what happened there, but I'm just sitting here looking that didn't look like he was in foul trouble, and he only played 14 minutes and had 2 points and 3 rebounds, and he only had 1 foul.
Yep. That had a lot to do with, like what I mentioned earlier, the Tennessee switching to that 1-4 lineup, and Forderson was the main guy. I think it wasn't Cam Watt, it wasn't anybody else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see the minutes breakdown now, and I'm saying, okay, they went with Ziegler, James, Fulkerson, Chandler, and Vescovi. Mm-hmm. And I get that. 10 minutes from Uros, 4 minutes from Huntley-Hatfield. I think Powell for his shooting is probably not as great defensively as Bailey, which is, to your point earlier, that's why you kind of think that Bailey's had some good moments defensively. Like, I think that year that he was redshirting, I think that was more of his thing in practices, was that he was kind of had a bulldog sort of mentality. I think going into last season, I think you hoped the offense, and heck, I wrote a story when I was still technically covering Tennessee, how Victor Bailey was the key to last season. Just because you had an experienced guy and experienced guards win in March. I wrote that, and because I truly believed it, and I still believe it. Like, they're going to have one of these guys if they're going to make any sort of run in March. But, we're at, December 8th right now. Heck, March is way off in the distance, and I'm looking at a team that is still struggling to find an identity. And that's not a good place to be in right now, is struggling to find an identity, because you're running out of non-conference games to find that identity. Like, you've only got a handful of them left. I think maybe 6 if you count the Texas game. You've only got a handful of those non-conference games left, and you've got to figure some stuff out. And, 5 with the Texas game. I think there's enough to be excited about. There's plenty to be optimistic about when you look at this team, but there's still a ton of cause for concern, because I don't know how they get better. I don't have a clue. And that's not a good place to be in, especially with some of the competition they've got coming up. Because a lot of teams are going to look at the makeup and they're going to say, look at this Tennessee team and say, their finesse, we can bully them, kind of make things uncomfortable for Chandler, make things uncomfortable for Fulkerson, and say, let's see what the rest of your guys have. And if they can't figure that out, then all these dreams and things that people are looking at and hopes and goals and whatever, and hashtag we're a basketball school, that's all going by the wayside, because I don't know what the answer to figuring that out is as to what this team is. But not having an identity 8 or 9 or however many games into the season that we're at right now, not having identity 8 games into the season, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you would certainly hope that you had a little bit better of an idea. And I'm not sure that I know much more about this Tennessee team now than I did going into that UT Martin game a month ago tomorrow.
I think we've had a couple of concerns that we had in the preseason basically be validated, Gene. And that like you said, I still think we don't have a whole lot to know, but I think we know that the concern we had about the post have basically come true at this point, where Tennessee doesn't have the tenacity from those post players, and most of Tennessee's post guys are more finesse players, and that can work out if you have that can work out on certain roster configurations. I don't think Tennessee has the roster configuration for that to work the way that they hoped it would, or the way that fans would like to see it. Huntley-Hatfield can be that guy that can go down and bang low. He just has to develop into that, and he's a true freshman who should still be in high school right now. Like he should be a high school senior. So he's going to have time to he's going to need a year to develop. I've definitely, unless he transfers or decides to go ahead and do it, I don't think he's a one and done player based off what I've seen from him so far. Again, we're 8 games into the year. That he could come on for him in January or February, and he could go lights out and be a really good player in the last half of the season, and go declare for the draft and get drafted in the second round or something like that. But he's the only guy I look at on Tennessee's roster that can be the type of big that could flourish in this lineup and help the guards out like they need to. Because Fulkerson is a guy that I like what Fulkerson brings to the team. I like his attitude. He's not a guy that I consistently trust to go back down an opposing post player and bully his way to a bucket. Because Grant Williams could do that, even as an undersized post. Grant could do that because he had broader shoulders, he had stronger feet, he had better hips, he could move better, and he could lower that shoulder and not draw a foul. Sometimes we would draw a foul, but he could not draw a foul and go fight for a bucket. Fulkerson doesn't have that. He's lankier. He doesn't have the upper body strength for that. He doesn't have the foot strength for that. There's times where I watch him try to back down a guy, and it's like he's pushing against a brick wall because he's just repeatedly backing up against the guy, and the guy's not moving but like an inch or two. Like he's not backing. He doesn't have the strength to back down somebody. Huntley-Hatfield does. Uros should, but like you said, he plays more of the finesse style as well. He doesn't do the backing down and going up for a hook shot a lot of times. He doesn't do those things that you need that type of post player to do. And Olivier doesn't either. We knew Olivier wasn't going to be that type of guy heading into the season too. So, and that's all your bigs. I mean, you have Jonas Adu, but he's not going to play a whole lot for you this year. Him having mono in the offseason definitely didn't help his development any, so I don't think you're getting anything much from him this year. And then Tomba's not going to play because he's redshirting. So like you have bigs that can maybe be that for you down the line, but I don't know that Adu's going to do that either. Adu reminds me more of Kyle Alexander, and obviously Alexander wasn't that kind of guy either. He was a really good rim protector, but he wasn't a bully down in the paint. So I definitely think this team needs that, but you're kind of screwed with what you have right now. That you can't really add anybody to the roster. This isn't NBA. You can't go and sign a free agent or make a trade. But I think that's an area that I would like to see Tennessee address for next year. Is either probably in the transfer portal, but go get you a big who you don't have. I'm not saying go get you a big that is like a 1990s NBA big where you're gonna all of a sudden go back to playing a really slow plodding style of offense, and you're gonna have these sets and run it through the big post player and whatnot. But I think you still need somebody that can do something like that, and Tennessee doesn't have right now unless Huntley-Hatfield develops into that, because he's not there right now. And I saw a lot of people saying, why didn't he play more? I was like, did you watch the 4 or 5 minutes he was in? He is not ready. Like he can do some good things and he has a lot of potential, but he's simply not ready for the big moment yet. That's fine. He's 8 games into his college career as an 18-year-old. I mean, and a guy who, post players a lot of times aren't developmentally there as much as the small forwards or the guards are. Like a lot of times when you see these superstars coming out of college or coming out of high school, they're almost always guards. Zion Williamson was an exception in the last 5 years, but most of the guys I'm thinking of that were big time guards or big time players coming out of college and going to the NBA draft were guards. You look at Ja Morant, you look at the kid from Oklahoma whose name I just all of a sudden can't remember.
Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, him too. But I was thinking of another one, Trae Young. You look at all those guys,
I'm
like
sorry,
yeah, but both those guys apply actually. Yeah. But yeah, you look at a lot of the big names from the last 4 or 5 years. Zion's really the only true forward that I can really think of that I know I'm forgetting somebody, but like he's the main one I'm thinking of that was like a superstar type of player. A lot of the times, like I said, the super talented 5-star players who come out of high school and go to college that have an instant kind of one and done impact are guards. So a lot of times the 5-star big men need a year or two to really come into their own. That's not the case for all of them, but that's been the case from a lot of the 5-stars I've seen that are power forwards and centers. A lot of the times they are not one and done players. So, or if they are, they get drafted very late or undrafted basically.
Let me toss a couple of names at you, and you'll sense a theme here because you'll see where I'm going with it. Anthony Davis, Karl Anthony Towns, and Julius Randle.
Yeah, I'm seeing the theme there for sure.
But the theme is not what you think. The last name that I mentioned, that's the key, because Julius Randle, I just did a Brendan Huntley-Hatfield player comp, NBA player comp. And the name that came up was Julius Randle. Now, the thing about that, why that's intriguing to me, is one of the things that was talked about was, I know I questioned, would this kid be receptive to playing as a post player? Because he's never done that before. Like so many of these Tennessee players have never played, folks, they've never played as a post. I don't care how big they are.
Mm-hmm.
They've never played as a post. Part of the reason Jonas Adu, aside from the mono, isn't playing is because he's never played as a post. Euros obviously has.
Yeah.
Because there was no alternative for him. But Huntley-Hatfield, watched that kid in AAU tournaments, never posted up. Was always out in the perimeter because that's where the game is shifting to. Olivier, if you want to play, you wanted a player comp for Olivier coming out of high school. If you had asked me for a player comp, I would have said Giannis, because that's exactly how he played. He'd grab a rebound and he'd just take.
That's exactly what his high school coach said when I interviewed him too. Was Giannis.
Yeah, he would grab a rebound. It would be a one-man fast break where he is veering up and down the court trying to get to the basket. You ask him, have you ever posted up? You ever posted up guys your size before? No. If there was a mismatch, I posted up, but never guys like my size. So that was new to me. So guys like Huntley-Hatfield are going to look lost because this is new to them. Yeah, and again, like I've mentioned this before, I think we talked about it 2-3 weeks ago. I'm like, you've got to find ways to play that kid because he is an elite talent.
Mm-hmm.
But he has to, and again, I'm not about to suggest that he isn't or hasn't, but he has to fully embrace. You're going to probably have to go in there and fight and bang in the SEC a little bit against some of those bigs. That's new to you. And I get it. You're supposed to be a high school senior right now. At what, IMG, I think is where he played at?
Scotland Prep.
Oh, I forgot he moved again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to be a high school senior. Like, I get all of that. But you asked for this.
Yeah.
I hate to say it so brutal, so like to be so honest about it, but you asked for this. You sat here, you watched how Tennessee played, and you asked for this. Who knows? maybe he thought he was going to be Yves Pons. That's exactly what I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be Yves Pons. So, I mean, that's the role that I thought he was going to play. He's going to be out on the perimeter. He was going to be a massive upgrade from Yves Pons. And you keep Fulkerson out there, and you have some of those size issues kind of handled. But, he hasn't really proven that he's ready for that yet. So you kind of just have to play him in a few minutes here and there in relief of John Fulkerson and be done with it. But again, it's all new, and I get it. It's people looking, well, we've got a 5-star kid, wilting away on the bench. I get it. I get the frustration. I completely understand that, but that's a kid who, I think Tennessee's probably handling him the best they can, because I don't. Last time I checked, Rick Barnes is not dumb. He kind of realizes that he's going to need that guy, so you give him a few minutes here, a few minutes there. But I mean, he's not ready for that. You hope that you can find a way to force feed him some minutes over the next 2 games against UNC Greensboro and USC Upstate, and then let's see what he does against Memphis, because I don't know what the whole Memphis situation is. It seems very weird, and it's very weird that an AAU coach who is now a college coach is not complaining that his AAU players are playing like AAU players. That's kind of on you, guy. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. I don't know what that Memphis game is going to be, but as long as you've got Amani Bates and Jalen Duran out there, you can't fire back at them necessarily with John Fulkerson and Josiah maybe. Josiah's got the build, and he's just a stinky good player who can probably handle some of that because Amani's kind of thin. But I mean, you'd much rather have Brandon Huntley-Hatfield have one of his kind of coming out performances, and I don't know what that means. Maybe it's just 9 points and 5 rebounds in 21 minutes. He doesn't have to be a 15 and 13 guy. He doesn't have to be a 26 and 17 guy. But if he can give you 9 points and 5 rebounds a game, man, I'm a Bulls fan. There was the Bulls picked up a lottery pick who was 6th man of the year. They drafted him in the lottery because of what he did a couple years ago. There's ways that you can impact all this stuff in just the time that you're given. But Huntley-Hatfield just has to prove that he's worth 15 to 17 to 20 minutes in a game with some proper lineups where maybe you can use Fulkerson and Huntley-Hatfield out there at the same time. Because what we're seeing right now is 4 guys, I think, towards the end of the second half of last night's game, you got 4 guys you've got 3 guards, obviously. You've got a 4th guy in Josiah Jordan-James who is more prone to not attack the basket and therefore shoot more shots from outside or in the mid-range. And you've got Fulkerson. That's not exactly a power lineup. So what are you going to get? You're going to get a lot of threes. So I don't know what the answer is. You'd have to somehow get Huntley-Hatfield in the mix. I just don't have a clue what that is. And it just, like I said, it just kind of goes back to the concerns that we've had about where's this team going to go and who can they turn to, who can kind of take over as the guy on this team. And I don't mean the star. I just mean who's the guy. I mean, we all believe it's Fulkerson, but Fulkerson can only say so much. He can only do so much. He's got to bring some guys are going to have to follow this guy's lead and go on this journey with this guy because, as I've said multiple times on this podcast, what I've seen is concerning.
And I think, I'm not, neither one of us are a big, Rick Barnes basher, and, there are definitely people out there who are that way, and I think it's fair to criticize him for things, and we've talked about that before, that, he's not above criticism. I like him as a coach. I think, like you said, he's smart. He's not stupid. You don't coach as long as he has for several decades being an idiot. He knows what he's doing. He's forgotten so much more about basketball than I know now or will ever know. And I think he's a very good coach, but he still makes decisions and does things that I disagree with and I don't like. And I think one thing that's very fair to criticize him about, and his assistants too over the last few years, has been their evaluations of big men. Because you look back, aside from, and Grant was an undersized big, but technically he was a big. You look besides him and Kyle Alexander, and it's been a lot of swings and misses. Zach Kent was a swing and miss. Derek Walker was a swing and miss. DJ Burns wasn't a swing and miss from a talent perspective, because I'm looking at what he's done at Winthrop, and he's killing it for them. But it was a swing and miss in terms of he was not a good culture fit, and he didn't do things that he was supposed to do, and that was a swing and miss because of that. But you could say is more on DJ Burns than it is on Barnes, but still, technically a swing and miss there because he's not on the team anymore. Corey Walker, technically kind of a big. He's more of a small forward in my opinion, but again, swing and miss there. He didn't do anything and didn't play for you. Right now, Urosh to me is a swing and miss. From what you thought you were going to get from him to what he is, that's a swing and a miss. Ferguson isn't, because he's developed into a good, consistent player. I never thought he'd be a. I thought maybe the time when he had that really good junior season, could he end up being a consistent all SEC player? And he hasn't been, but he's not been horrible either. He's been a steady hand for the most part when he's been healthy. So he that's not a swing and a miss. But Huntley-Hatfield and Olivier, I'm very interested to see what happens this year, because Olivier, we've talked about, he's taken a step forward. He has. He's shown good signs of development this year. But you look at the big games for Tennessee this year and their the non-cupcake matchups this season for Tennessee, and he's been fairly non-existent. I think part of that's, again, because you've had, especially in the Tech game, you've gone to that 1-4 lineup, and he hasn't played a ton of minutes. But you look at the Villanova game. He played 27 minutes in that game. 0 points. He did grab 6 boards, that's good, but only shot two attempts in that game from the field. But again, I'm not looking for Olivier to be a big-time scorer. You have other guys to do that. I'm looking for him to be a rebounder, a shot blocker, and a guy who can give you 7, 8 to 10 points in a game. So with that in mind, I'm looking again at the big games. 0 points, 6 boards against Villanova. Against UNC, 7 points, 6 boards, 3 assists, and a block. That's solid. That I will take from Olivier in a big game, especially when he did that in 17 minutes. Against Colorado, in 13 minutes, 3 points, 5 boards, 2 blocks. It's okay. It doesn't really move the needle a ton, but it's all right. And against Texas Tech, 2 points, 3 boards, and 2 blocks in 13 minutes. Not great. 2 blocks are good, but everything else, it is what it is. He's obviously made improvements from last year and the year before last, and I think I don't think he qualifies as a swing and a miss right now, because again, I'd never expected him to be a big volume scorer, a guy who's going to go out and get you 15 points a game or anything like that. I didn't even expect him to really average 10 points a game. If he can get you 8 and 7 or 8 and 8, if he can be that kind of guy for you, perfect. I think that's exactly what he needs to be, and that's exactly what that's a really good fit for him. I never expected him to be an all SEC type of player, but I think Rick Barnes had pretty high hopes. But again, that's coach speak too, so I don't want to put a bunch on for quotes that he said for a UT press release or for to the media when Olivier first got here or whatever, when he was saying I think he can be this, I like him for this. You're going to talk up your guy, especially when he's new to the team. But Huntley-Hatfield, again, 8 games in the year. I'm not going to put a whole lot into that, but I think that's one area that Gene, I 100% think is worth criticizing Rick Barnes, is the evaluation, and his assistants, again, is their evaluation of big men, because Tennessee hasn't had, aside from Grant Williams, and I guess you could throw in John Fulkerson too, Tennessee hasn't had a notable big man in the Rick Barnes era. And Kyle Alexander was good. Don't get me wrong, he was very good, but he was a guy that I wish could have redshirted his first year there and whatnot. But for how he started out from a guy who only played a couple years of basketball when he first got to Tennessee to where he ended up, very solid. And he's doing a pretty good job of playing professionally right now for the Canadian. And I think up in Canada right now, he's not doing poorly at all. But you have a very small group there of 2, probably 3 guys you can point to and say, okay, those evaluations were good for these big men, or for these power forwards, or for these, whatever, however you want to classify them. But there's been a lot of misses in the big men category for Tennessee under Rick Barnes, and that's an area that I think, and they also, they tried. I know they tried last year to get this past off season to get a big man to come and transfer. And I guess you'd also throw in EJ Anosike in there, Gene, as another kind of swing and a miss on a big man eval. So they've tried to get transfers in, and either got the wrong one or couldn't get the guy to come to the school. You also look at Blackshear, a couple years ago. I remember us talking about him when he was at Florida and just how disappointing he was there. But Tennessee, and you talked about it, I think when we were still the SEC podcast, Gene, told Tennessee he was coming and then didn't come. So, I mean, swing and misses in a lot of different respects, but I think that's one area that I definitely think it is 100% fair to criticize Rick Barnes, and it's showing on this roster specifically, and last year's too, that you've missed out on a lot of big men evaluations in terms of what you like your 4 and 5 to be. What Rick Barnes likes was that 4 and 5 to be, specifically the 4 of being more of a bruiser type. Tennessee doesn't have that, and it's hurting them right now. Again, like I said, Huntley-Hatfield can develop into that, I think, but can and will are two different things. So that's an area that I think is a 100% fair criticism of Barnes and his staff, as they've not consistently been good on their evaluations of big men.
Yeah, I think one thing, so here's the problem. If you are a big, like what has Tennessee shown that they can get to the league? They've got 2 guards. I believe both of them are playing in the G League right now. I believe Springer and Johnson are both playing like some G League basketball right now. They've got Jordan Bone, another guard, NBA kid. I think he's still floating around the G League. They've got Admiral floating around the G League, and they've got Grant Williams. So if you are walking into the living room, say you're Rick Barnes and his staff, and you see a guy that you want, you walk into the living room of one of these kids who's a big, what's your pitch?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like
you're going to have to pull back to your time in Texas. But that's been a while at this point.
Yeah, like you are fighting, because let's look at what Tennessee is right now. At least from a guard perspective, they're getting the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like they brought in the number 1 guard in the country. They brought in this cycle coming up, they brought in a kid who I think is probably undervalued a little bit, maybe because of his speed, and B.J. Edwards, but is a really good player who's going to come in and be a good player for Tennessee next year. But like if you're looking around the country, Tennessee's very low on the list of places that I would even consider if I was a big.
Yeah, and that's why it's important for Grant Williams to keep doing what he's doing in the NBA. Now he's having a good year, but that's still not being able to sell Grant Williams isn't. You don't want that.
That's
you don't want necessarily Grant to be your top option for a post player in terms of selling him to a prospect. I 100% agree with you.
He's no longer a person you can sell, because that was 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's true too.
In fact, that's the problem with it. Like if you're looking around, how are you going to out recruit Kentucky for a big? How are you going to out-recruit North Carolina? Heck, how are you going to out-recruit Kansas? Or some of the teams that you're fighting for prospects, Alabama. Like,
yep.
You just watch Texas Tech. The teams that you're recruiting against, how are you going to out-recruit these guys? How are you going to out-recruit those programs? Heck, half of the Big Ten, Luka Garza, Hunter Dickerson, like they all the big Cockburn at Illinois, I think is his name. I believe he's still there.
Yep, he is.
Like, how are you going to, like, the Big Ten, they utilize the bigs. They go to them. They bring them in. They develop them. And, how are you going to out-recruit Juwan Howard for a big? Forget, the NBA guy. Watch Juwan Howard's, college tape. Watch him in the league. He was really good. Don't think of the Miami Heat version of Juwan Howard, who was always sitting over there in warm-ups and then in a suit because he just joined the coaching staff. That's the problem. Like, when we talked about okay, these are great recruiters you're bringing in, and the Justin coach, I can't remember his last name, I'm noticing him on future head coaching list, and it's earned. But if your style is we're going to go into the post, like when I'm yelling, they need to get somebody who's good in that regard. That's why, because it's not specifically about developing the ones that you've got in the program. It's help bringing new ones in, and you can't. It's hard. It's going to be hard for you to get quality post players, because if I'm recruiting against Tennessee, I'd be like, man, Grant Williams is a once in a lifetime kid.
Yeah.
Once in a lifetime kid. What else have they done? What else have they gotten? Oh, they got the Huntley-Hatfield, but that kid thinks he's a guard. That's exactly how I personally will recruit against Tennessee with what they're trying to do when they bring these guys in. But Huntley-Hatfield, y'all honestly, what you need is for Huntley-Hatfield or Adu to develop into an NBA post.
Yep.
Or I'm sorry, an NBA caliber player, while you're in Knoxville, and not him leaving after a year, going somewhere and maybe playing a style that's more conducive to how he wants to play, and then going into the league as that would be your worst nightmare. Your worst nightmare is for that kid to transfer to a school and play maybe a way that he feels more comfortable playing, and declaring for the draft a year. I mean, putting up outlandish numbers and going to the draft and being a lottery pick. Because from a talent perspective, let's not kid ourselves. Huntley-Hatfield is a lottery talent.
Yep.
Mid first round, mid to late first round at the worst. But a decent shooter with that size and a pretty good handle, those are all legitimate things that he has. So we can all point to the flaws in the recruiting, but I think that he's getting what he can get. I mean, like, they haven't signed. Think of it like this: who was the last big they signed in November?
That's actually a really good point. But a lot of the bigs they've signed have been late edition guys.
Fulkerson? I don't know when Derek Walker. Maybe Derek Walker. But DJ Burns I think he was a reclassified kid.
Yep.
And so, like, it's not like
Olivier was a late edition. Adu was a late edition. Tomba was a reclassification. Huntley-Hatfield was a reclassification. So yeah, it might be a Derek Walker or a Zach Kent or whatever that was the last.
They're not. Yeah, kids aren't chomping at the bit to come to Knoxville. Not bigs. Again, they got zero problem getting guards.
Oh yeah.
You'll have zero problem getting guards there. With that, that system, that style, that's not going to be. If people are looking and seeing what Kennedy Chandler is doing right now, so they're not going to. As long as Rick Barnes is there, and whoever ultimately replaces him, as long as they got to keep that train rolling, they're not going to have any issue getting guards. And plus, usually your 5-star prospects are quick point guards, ridiculously athletic, you'll see ridiculously athletic 6'6" wings who are like 4 stars just because there can only be 35 stars or 32, whatever the number is. But, and then athletically freakish 6'11", your Huntley-Hatfields, your Jonas Adus, guys like that. Those are the guys who, and Tennessee's getting those guys in there. But again, bigs, they got to be developed. Like, again, if people look back, if you want to throw Anthony Davis at me, that was 10 years ago. If you want to throw Jahlil Okafor at me, that was 7 years ago. Julius Randle was like 6. Julius Randle, I think, is on his 5th NBA team in like his 4th contract, like his second. He's like his second big contract, I believe, because he played for the Lakers, Pelicans, the Knicks. I think that's it. But he's in the league 5 years. Like that, and like if that's what you're throwing at me in terms of like, well, elite bigs, like kids who just went in and took off. like it ain't all that. I mean, to your point earlier, Nathanael, it ain't all that common. Get a Karl Anthony Towns, but listen to the programs you're talking about too.
Right.
Whatchamacallit got the kid from Duke, got the kid from Miami a couple years ago. I can't remember his name, but he was like a top 15, top 20 player in the country. Averaged ridiculous stats his 1 year at Duke, and he was barely a first-round draft pick. And again, I'm sorry I can't remember the kid's name, but he was from Miami, and put up like 17 and 11. I think it was the COVID year. Averaged a pretty solid double-double, but that's what you're having kids that come in and these kids want to be in the NBA. And then they look at the NBA, you know what they don't see? They don't see somebody in the post with that left hand raised demanding the ball. Mm-hmm. You may see Giannis do it on occasion, but then you see Giannis grab a defensive rebound and go 94 feet on like 5 steps and dunk a basketball. And you can't convince those kids that they can't be that. So I don't know what it is. Is it a system change that has to happen? I don't know what it's going to take for Tennessee to kind of fix its problem in terms of, because I don't think it's an evaluation thing, because they're getting the talent, but especially now. I mean, some of it, let me phrase that, some of it is probably some evaluation. Like, I mean, Zach Kent, okay, you got me there. I mean, you got me there. I watched that kid play. Derek Walker, I thought he had some good minutes, but he just couldn't score. And then he had other issues off the court. I mean, but everybody they've brought in over the past 3-4 years, when I've really kind of been tuned into what Tennessee's been doing from a roster construction standpoint, I get it. I do. I get it. I thought Urosh was a reach when I started talking to people here in Chattanooga about him. And I'm like, I thought he was probably a reach because I just didn't think he was going to be like some eraser. I think Tennessee fans thought they were getting Hunter Dickinson, and I'm like, no, you're not. You're getting a good basketball player that can do some nice things, but you don't have a future Big Ten Player of the Year type kid there. So I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. But as pretty much has been the tone of this podcast when it comes to me talking, I don't know what the answer is, but it has to be fixed. I feel like I've said that 5 times.
And to your point about Derek Walker, like I agree with you. I think there's talent there, and despite Fred Hoiberg's best efforts to demolish Nebraska, Derek's actually having a decent season right now to start the year. He's in 10 games. He's averaging basically 9-6 and a block and a half a game. So I mean, that's solid. That's if Tennessee had that right now, that'd be solid. He's shooting 78% from the floor right now. Of course, he's attempting like 5 field goals a game, but still, that's solid, man. I'd take that. I'd take that all day from a post player for Tennessee right now. But yeah, no, I mean that. But again, he's also like, it's been years since he's been at Tennessee, and he's had to go find himself. And I think a change of scenery was good for Derek Walker. I think that was part of the reason why he is succeeding the way he is now. And again, that's not like he's lighting up the world, but hey, a 9-6 and a block and a half from a 6'8", 6'9" guy, I would love to have it on Tennessee's roster right now. And again, Olivier can kind of be that, but those obviously are 2 very different styles of players, Derek Walker and Olivier Camois. But we could talk forever about the men's team and keep going on. I wanted to. We've already gone for a while here, but I wanted to really quickly, before we do end the podcast, give a shout out to Lady Vols, and we'll probably have a Lady Vol basketball fever podcast episode here fairly soon, because the Lady Vols are tearing up right now, Gene. They've continued their run. They're undefeated right now. They had another fourth quarter comeback against a solid team on the road against Virginia Tech, which I don't think they're as good as USF or as good as some of the other teams Lady Vols have played, but Tech's still a good, solid squad. They're 7-2, really good shooting team, and Tennessee won 64-58 in Blacksburg, and again had to come from behind to do so. Outscored them by 9 points in the fourth quarter, and Jordan Walker had a phenomenal game. She had 17 points, 7 boards, 5 assists, was a perfect 4-4 from 3. Sarah Puckett added 15 points, 3 boards, and a block, and she had the SEC Freshman of the Week after that game, and then the game against Tennessee Tech. But Gene, I saw a tweet, but I want to make this kind of quick here as we're ending the show. But I saw a tweet from Charlie Cream that said what Kellie Harper is doing right now and having the Lady Vols undefeated back into the top 10 in the AP poll for the first time in, I think, 3, maybe 4 years, without Ray Burrell especially, is already early, like, Coach of the Year criteria. And I would agree with him. With what Kellie Harper's been able to do with this roster without Ray Burrell, with a lot of the teams that the Lady Vols have had to play with some very solid high major teams and some ranked teams, and already having a couple true road games and a couple neutral site games, she's done a very, very, very good job, I think. And you're seeing some of her, the players that have been here a couple years develop, and seeing what they've developed into, especially Jordan Horston. I mean, she's been phenomenal. But I mean, look at what Tamari Key's been doing. She's been a double machine. She reminds me a lot of what Darnell Stokes was for Tennessee, except she can block a lot more shots than Darnell did. But I mean,
about the same height.
Yeah, they are about the same height. We've talked before. Her and Eve Pons are the same height.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think Alexis Dye is kind of finding her rhythm finally. She had 8 and 7 against Virginia Tech, and it looked like she's kind of getting into rhythm and finding her place on the team more and more with each game. I just have been extremely impressed with Kellie Harper and her staff and this team through the first month of the year. Now, what happens when we start playing Stanford? What happens when we play UConn? What happens when we get into SEC play? I'll be very interested to see what happens there. But they've not like they haven't been tested. They've had some really good tests so far here in the non-conference, and have passed every one of them so far. And they've gotten a little lucky a couple of times, but good teams get lucky. So I think this is a good team. I think it's very nice for me, Gene, to see a single-digit number next to the Lady Vols again. When you're looking at in the little box score thing, you're looking at the rankings. It's nice to see a single-digit number for Tennessee. So I just want to say that I think Charlie Cream is right. I think right now, if you're looking a month into the year, I don't know how you. To me, Kellie Harper is the coach of the year right now. First month, again, we're in early December. We'll see what happens when we get to March. But right now, Kellie Harper is the early front runner for coach of the year in the women's game, in my opinion.
Yeah, real quick, I'll keep it short. I think what happened was when Burrell went out, I think they just completely devoted themselves to the defensive end. Only one team has topped over 60 points, and that was Texas, who had 70. Because I think they realized we have to get to a certain number. I'm looking, they're averaging 65 points a game. They're not tearing it up, not shooting it particularly well, except for making some timely baskets here and there when you need them. They're making shots. I mean, they're shooting 26% from 3. I'm not sure exactly where that ranks in the country, but I'm pretty certain that it's not very high. And again, to make matters worse, they're shooting 57% from the free throw line. So you look at all these offensive stats and you're like, this doesn't make any sense, man. It does. You look at that from that perspective, just staring at those numbers right there. You have it just always goes back to the defense. The defense is allowed only 31% from the field, 29% from 3. They're out rebounding opponents by 16 a game, which eerily that was weirdly reminiscent of some of those early those late Holly Warlick days when they just dominated you on the glass, but they couldn't score. This team kind of has some scoring issues, but they're so much better defensively. Now, like you said, what are they going to do against some of these bigger teams? But UCF is no slouch. Some of the teams that they faced aren't a slouch. And USF, I'm sorry. I don't know why I say UCF. But UCF is a solid program too. Texas,
both of them are, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so, Virginia Tech, breaking that win streak, that home win streak they've got, like that's not a slouch there. And these teams aren't even able to break through in that. Nobody shot 40% against Tennessee. The highest is 36% this year. Highest. So again, I think you were looking at a team that has just realized what it has and realized what it has to do to win. And I think Kellie Harper did an amazing job of getting the team to buy into that. And I think that's just a credit to her because, obviously, you lose your best offensive talent and a good defensive player. This could have gone off the rails, and she's kept everything right on track as they've now, jumped into the top 10 of rankings with, some quality competition coming up, some good opportunities for them to really build on this. I'm not sure when they'll get. I've seen Georgia State play. They're not going to get tested. ETSU, UTC. That's 3 really, really easy victories there. Maybe a chance to kind of bump up some of those shooting stats. But, Stanford's going to be tough. That's a week from Saturday. And then you get into league play. So this was my quick way of saying, kudos to Kellie Harper and everything that she's been able to do so far this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm very excited to see when Ray Brill does come back and how the team adjusts and kind of what happens with different there, because it's going to be an adjustment. They haven't played with her in a while, so it will be an adjustment. But I think ultimately, obviously, she'll make the team better when she comes back because she is a phenomenal player. But I've been particularly impressed with Horston stepping up and doing what she's been able to do in the meantime. And Gene, I don't know where the Lady Vols rank nationally, but I'm looking at in the SEC. I can talk. The statistical category in the SEC, and right now the Lady Vols are dead last in three-point shooting percentage in the SEC. So I don't imagine they're very high up there nationally, but they're last with 25.9%, and Georgia is second to last with 27.4%. So there's a pretty decent gap there, 1.5% gap between Georgia and Tennessee in terms of three-point shooting, and Tennessee has some of the lowest points per game in the SEC right now as well. They are second to last. Only Vandy is scoring fewer points per game than the Lady Vols right now. But again, like you said, I think that's more indicative of the fact that Ray's been out and this team has focused a lot more on defense, and they're winning the game, so it doesn't matter to me that you're not scoring a bunch of points, because I think that's going to improve when Ray Brill does come back. You're able to shut down these opposing teams very effectively, and teams that have been scoring a pretty good amount. Like Virginia Tech had a really good offense. I want to say Texas, again, that's when you said that scored 70, but I think that also was an overtime in that game too. But still, even with that, Tennessee did a really good job of keeping those percentages low and the offensive efficiency for Texas low. So yeah, I've been very impressed with Kellie Harper and the staff. But that'll be where we end this podcast. Again, be on the lookout for a Lady Vol specific podcast sometime soon here in the next few days or so. And that's the same show. Again, you don't have to subscribe to a new show. If you're already subscribed here to Vol Basketball Fever, the Lady Vol Basketball Fever will come here on the same feed. So don't worry about having to go find a new stream or a new show or anything like that. It'll be right here. But thank you all so much for listening. If you're new here, again, as I said, top of the show, thank you so much. Hope you come back. Subscribe to the show today. Go leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at Vol Hoops Fever, and go like us on Facebook at Vol Basketball Fever. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for listening to the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Subscribe to the show so you'll never miss another episode.